I thought I would start with something light, something trivial, except it turns out not to be that. There have only been 4 major leaguers with the surname Head. For a long time, it was only 2 pitchers Ralph Head and Ed Head. No relation. More recently, we've seen outfielder Gerard Lee Head, who briefly played for Cleveland in 2011 and went 3 for 24. His 125 average, 160 on base percentage, and 167 slugging percentage mean he's forever in the record books with an OPS plus of -7. Even closer to the present day, in 2021 and 2022, Louis Gibson Head pitched for the Rays, Marlins, and Orioles. Louis was a pretty special player, too. He was an 18th round draft pick in 2012. He labored in the minors for 9 years before getting the call. That included spending 2020 as a solar panel salesman when the minor league season was canceled. He was pretty effective in a small sample way for a 31-year-old rookie, posting a 2.31 ERA in 35 innings. After that, his control wandered away, and he walked his way out of the big leagues. But that takes nothing away from a heroic, Crash Davis-like journey. I don't know what he's doing right now. His career ended in 2023 when he was 33, but I hope he feels like he wrung everything he could out of his skills, because he did. Now, Ralph Head. Ralph Head was a 1920s Phillies pitcher. I feel like that sentence just about tells his whole story, except that he was also Satan's pitcher. You see, 103 years ago, a very lost Phillies team had a pitching staff that ran from Jimmy Ring, who remains a great example of a good pitcher trapped on a bad club, to, well, Ralph Head of Tallapoosa, Georgia. Ralph had been in the minors since 1913. He would remain in the minors until 1931. And like later headman Louis Head, he gave it his all. He had some very fine years for the Eastern League Hartford Senators at the turn of the 1920s, going 47 and 33 with an ERA of about 2.42 from 1920 to 1922. Those were the years the Phillies were buying into. The Hartford papers called him Georgia Boy Head, and one time that I found Georgia Boardhead, but I think that was a typo. Stop me if this is predictable, but the Phillies hadn't reckoned with the Baker Bowl. This is the unfairness of life. The National League's average ERA in 1923 was 3.99. Head's road ERA was 4.26. That still wasn't great, obviously, but it was good enough that it might have earned him more chances. But problem, he pitched in a very small cavern. His home ERA was 9.39. Opposing batters hit 391, 425, 612 against him in Philadelphia. Everyone he faced was Ty Cobb in a good year. Thus, in aggregate, he went 2-9 with the ERA of the beast, 6.66. Head allowed 13 home runs that season. 11 of them were hit at the Baker Bowl. Among those who got to him were future Hall of Famers Zach Wheat, Frankie Frisch, Jim Bottomley, Pie Traynor, Rogers Hornsby, and yes, Casey Stengel. He was pie for the Cubs batters, one Philadelphia Inquirer game story said. He was, too, and not just for the Cubs batters. Also, I would like some pie, right? Did I say that out loud? There were some incredible Ralph Head games. By incredible, that it's not complimentary. Giants 22, Phillies 8, with John McCraw's team scoring in all 9 innings. That so rarely happens. Head started and pitched to 8 batters in the top of the first, came out again in the top of the second, and struggled through another 6. At that point, 6 runs were in. Future Hall of Famer Ross Young's driving in Heine Groh on a single was the last one, and Phil's manager Art Fletcher finally pulled the plug. There is a story, and we've told it before on this show, that after Miller Huggins died, Art Fletcher was offered the job of managing the Yankees. He was a coach with the Yankees by then. He said no because he had promised his wife he would never put himself through that again. And when you look at the year of Ralph Head, you can kind of understand why she extracted that promise from him. Reds 21, Phillies 7 was another head special. Pardon the expression. I was going to say head start, actually. George Burns single, Ed Roush single, Pat Duncan single, Bubbles Hargrave 3-run homer. Just another day at the office. Heads line, 2.2 innings, 8 hits, 2 walks, 7 runs, all earned. A burlesque, the Inquirer critic called that one. It was also certainly the same author who called the 20-run game by the Giants a woozy fracas. The only description I failed to find was a zany romp. Parenthetically, on the day that had experienced that woozy fracas, the love gossip columnist in the Inquirer said, "Elephants love but one in a lifetime, but who wants to be an elephant?" To which I replied, "Don't knock it till you've tried it." She, Miss Laurel Gray, also declared, "A man of 20 in love is romantic. A man of 30 in love is droll. A man of 40 in love is absurd. But a man of 50 in love is romantic." And so there is still hope for some of us. And next to that came the grace note, "Every spoonful of Kellogg's bran helps free you from toxic poisons." The Phillies definitely have had their bran. Since 1900, they've allowed 20 or more runs 26 times, the most of any team. Actually shows you, given how many thousands of Phillies games there have been in that time, how rare it is. They actually won one of those contests, a windblown 26-23 Wrigley Field game, in which both teams had over 20 hits and combined for 9 home runs, Dave Kingman hitting 3, Mike Schmidt hitting 2. Much more recently, the Mets scored 24 runs against them in August 2018, which is triply hard to believe in light of the present, when the Mets don't hit at all, and when Ranger Suarez is a great pitcher. He was the Phillies starter that day. This also seems like a good time to remind you that Mike Schmidt played 138 games at Wrigley Field, had 524 at-bats in the building. He hit exactly 50 home runs, something he never did in his career. The conditions just wouldn't allow it unless he had been a Cub. That park and Cubs pitching, I mean, that would have been a problem with being a Cub, turned him into Babe Ruth with averages of 307, 396, 653. It's amazing how rarely players in their ballparks are aligned. Todd Helton and Larry Walker are the big exceptions of recent decades. It was definitely not the case with Ralph Head. In February 1924, the Phillies sold him to Fort Worth of the Texas League, Natch. He never made it back up. He's ERA 666 forever. In 1923, Warren Harding died in office of embarrassment and cardiac disease. The Supreme Court declared that a Sikh could not be a citizen because he wasn't white. No person of Indian origin could be an American. In fact, this remained true for almost a quarter of a century. It also ruled that a minimum wage for women and kids was illegal because it infringed on the right of contract. Oklahoma outlawed the teaching of evolution, more of that in a bit. The Cotton Club opened in Harlem, which was cool, but it was owned by gangsters and wouldn't let blacks enter, only perform, so that was not so cool. And Henry Kissinger was born. Yes, it was the year of the 666 ERA. Now, Ed Head is a very different story from the other heads, at least for him. There is some tragedy in here. Edward Marvin Head, right-hander of Louisiana. He was a career Brooklyn Dodger. Unlike Ralph, again, no relation. He was a decent pitcher. He wasn't a great one, but he could hang in there. He threw 6 career shutouts, including on April 23rd, 1946, a no-hitter at Ebbets Field against the Braves. He walked 3 and struck out 2. That's just what a lot of pitching was like back then, walking 3 and striking out 2. It was a very light-hitting Braves lineup, although there were a few decent or even good hitters in there, like center fielder Johnny Hippity Hop and right fielder Tommy Holmes. Hop indeed was the last out. He hopped the ball to Billy Herman at second, who completed the 4-3 putout. There was one controversial play. Pee Wee Reese bobbled a grounder, which might have been called a hit or an error. It was called an error, and thus the no-hitter went into the books. The catcher, by the way, not Roy Campanella, not yet. Campy was still not allowed, according to what passed for the American way back then. Not Mickey Owen, he was in Mexico, a renegade from baseball labor and salary practices also, then passing as the American way. The catcher was Pharrell Anderson of Maple City, Kansas. Say, I've got an idea. Let's all go out to the barn and put on a Rodgers and Hammerstein style musical about Maple City, Kansas, except with the cynicism of Sherwood Anderson's Winesburg, Ohio, and Edgar Lee Masters' Spoon River Anthology. And yes, both have been adapted for song, but not together. In this version, everyone's dead, but not before they had a lot of illicit sex. That Ed Head threw a no-hitter is great, of course, but it isn't that special. His no-hitter was, for 3 reasons. Number 1, it was his first major league start, his first major league appearance since 1944, war service having intervened. He had last pitched and been blown out 10-1 on July 9th, 1944. This was just 3 months short of 2 full years later. Second, he and his wife, well, primarily his wife, had delivered a son the day before the start, so that's a pretty neat 2-day run. Have a kid, pitch a no-hitter. Here's the third part, which is a story of resilience, but it's also tragic, and it concerns a woman who wouldn't live long enough to become his wife if that were even in the cards. Ed Head wasn't born a right-handed pitcher, he was born a left-hander. And at the moment he threw his no-hitter, he was pretty close to being a no-hander, because not long before his discharge from the military, in the winter of 1945, a 57mm anti-tank gun recoiled directly into his pitching shoulder, and whatever damage that did, it was still troubling him throughout camp, and one presumes when the season started. But that's not really what I'm talking about. In 1935, Ed of Selma, Louisiana, was a 17-year-old lefty, possibly on his semi-pro team bus, possibly he had just gone to see a game. I think it was probably that because his girlfriend, 16, maybe 14 according to some stories, was on the bus too. She was in his arms. She was in his left arm, his pitching arm specifically. You know how buses are. They're generally 2 seats to a side. She was in the window seat. Ed was on the aisle. The window was probably open. There was an accident. A second bus from a second game came along. It was a narrow, poorly lit gravel road in the middle of nowhere in rural Louisiana. A lot of Louisiana still is pretty rural. The buses had headlights, but there were no running lights on the rest of the long bodies of the buses. If you look up on a map where the buses were going to, where they were coming from, it seems inexplicable that they should have wound up in the same place at the same time, and that's always a problem when it comes to automotive vehicles. But more than that, it was a primitive time for both vehicles and roads, and these buses were built wider than the roadbed itself. So it's not like a 2-lane situation. It was more like a no-lane situation. Well, they came together kind of broadside, and Ed Head's girlfriend, who might have again had an arm dangling out the window, say she was just gone. But in the act of being pulled or yanked outside, that was what happened. She seemed to hold on to Ed's left arm as she went. It was reported as fractured in 2 places, but it sounds more like it was just dangling by a thread. The doctors said his left arm would have to be amputated, but he fought them. He had an uncle who was a surgeon who looked at it and thought he could save the arm through surgery, and he did. But in terms of baseball, and in this story, this is very much the minor issue. Whatever lightning the limb might have had in it was gone. Its functionality in general was gone. And so, incredibly, he learned to pitch right-handed, and he could do it. He could do it at the major league level of competency. He had only a middling fastball, but he mixed in a good slider and a changeup. After the no-hitter, Head's career had just a dozen games to go, and only 3 more starts. He hurt his right arm, and whatever capabilities 1935 medicine had to keep him from losing his left arm altogether, it couldn't bring the right one back to that major league level of quality. He pitched intermittently the rest of the year, tried again in the minors in 1947, but it just wasn't to be. And I'll tell you again, I just wanted to start off by telling you a story about guys named Head. Ralph Head and Ed Head, they both seem to be kind of neat stories. And even the other two, they had their moments in the sun, and that's important. But what really bugged me as I looked at the coverage of Ed Head, and a no-hitter was always a big national story in those days, none of them mentioned his girlfriend's name. And they never mentioned the specific date of the accident. Even his Sabre bio doesn't. And at first I couldn't figure out when it was, and therefore I couldn't figure out if anyone had ever reported who she was. And I felt like she deserved to have an identity in history, in baseball history especially. Eventually, though, I did figure it out. The accident happened near a little crossroads town called Mer Rouge on August 19th, 1935. And again, this is an odd coincidence, but there were two buses said to have been filled not with teams, but with fans who had been in ball games in different parts of the state and were heading to different places. And if you look at a map, I know I'm repeating this, but it bugs me. It seems like one of them at least shouldn't have been anywhere near where they collided. Maybe that was the problem. Maybe someone got lost. I'll say this, neither driver was injured. Isn't it odd how that so often happens? There were at least 13 other injuries as a result of the collision. Ed's and his girlfriend's were the most serious. They must just have been right at the point of contact. There were crushed legs and internal injuries, fractured ribs, cuts and bruises. This was a very serious accident. But as far as I know, the only person who died was Irma Lee Barton of Pioneer, Louisiana. A few months earlier, I find her playing Ruth in some sort of biblical pageant. A more precise description of what happened to her was given by the coroner, but I'm gonna spare you. It was just suddenly and immediately fatal. I wish I knew more about her. I wish I could find more in the time and with the resources allotted to me. But it also occurs to me that she didn't live long enough to write very much of her own story. I just wanted to say her name because that's more important than any no-hitter or jokes about guys whose name was Head, which is not inherently funny anyway. Irma Lee Barton. I'm sorry that was your last baseball game, whatever it was. She was 16 years old and dwells forever in the house of the infinite inning. Well, hello there, and welcome back to the show, Infinite Inning number 380, beginning on a somber note. My name is Stephen Goldman, your equally somber host for this journey to the past, on a mission to better understand, or at least have empathy for others here in the present, and the time machine as ever is the game of baseball. But whatever you do, don't let the time machine be a school bus. In any era, those things just aren't safe, and that's what Ed and Irma were riding on when the collision happened, although I suppose it would have been deadly with almost any two vehicles. I'm going to roll on pretty quickly here because I am running way behind, and because some of what I would normally tell you in this middle segment, including what I wrote for Baseball Prospectus this week, relates in part to our second segment. What I wrote was called Back to the Serengeti with Landon Roop, and it's about the reaction that a quartet of Giants pitchers had a week ago today when the Giants attempted, anyway, to have a pride night for at least some of their fans. You'd like to think that everyone could be involved in that, but no, it can't. If you do read the piece that I wrote, the comments have been pretty lively, and I would just ask this question. Why is it only on Pride Day that players are brave enough to take a so-called stand? They're asked to wear pink on Mother's Day. They just wore poppy ribbons on Memorial Day. They wear number 42 for Jackie Robinson, camo for the military at the drop of a hat, pardon the expression. They put the hats on, actually, and no one kicks because they're not brave enough. No player will say, I don't support Jackie Robinson Day. It's against my religion. Well, because that's not fashionable anymore. Give me time and I'll show you where bigotry used to be supported with scripture in the way that these players are trying to use it against the LGBTQ, etc. community. These are the sons of Ham, and they were cursed down to the present day. So it was okay to do anything to them. Well, now they've just moved on to a different group of people and a different page of scripture. And I have someone asking me in the comments, well, why is a baseball team, why is it okay for these players to be asked to do that by their employer? And the answer is because that's how their employers make money. As I said repeatedly in the comments, these are brand ambassadors. And when the company puts on a day for the military or a day for moms or a day for anyone, they're just looking for extra excuses to supply to people, so they buy tickets. Jackie Robinson Day is spectacularly hypocritical. They're celebrating his emancipation because around Major League Baseball. It's like Pontius Pilate hosting Christmas dinner or something. It just makes no sense. I'm glad they're doing it, but it really is a weird form of special pleading. Hooray, he got past us. When a minor league team has Star Wars night and all the players wear R2-D2 themed uniforms, do you think anyone involved with that promotion on the team side, really gives a damn about Star Wars or wanted to spend the money acquiring the uniforms? No, it's not an endorsement so much as they just thought you would be into it. And the players don't care enough about their dignity to not wear the uniforms, so we go forward. We have Star Wars night. We give away Aaron Judge dressed as Darth Vader bobbleheads. Does it mean he is Darth Vader? Does it mean he watched the prequels and endorses the fact that I killed them all, I killed every one of them, said Anakin, who murders an entire Hogwarts worth of children in the third movie? Could Aaron Judge plausibly say, I choose not to be associated with the murder of children, therefore I am not participating in this promotion? Sure. But in that hypothetical, he wouldn't care enough, because no one with half a brain would think that his participation equated that sort of endorsement. Well, similarly, on Pride Night, all you're being asked to do is put on a rainbow cap and say, yes, there is a group of fans. There is a community. Some of them are here tonight. Welcome to the ballpark. That's it. The rest of it is between you and your worst private self. And if you don't voice those thoughts, we won't talk about them. The Dodgers, back at the end of April, had a Japanese Heritage Night. You might have noticed, but Shohei Ohtani is on that team. And they sold these cool kimono-like jerseys. Or not sold, they gave them away with the tickets. I guess that is selling them one way or the other. Can you imagine a player coming out and saying, yeah, I'm not participating in Japanese Heritage Night. I don't believe in Japanese people. It's against my beliefs. Japan, even my grandpa died at Pearl. I don't mock that. Maybe there's someone out there that feels that way. I'm sure there is, but they don't voice that. They don't say anything because on some level they know it's ugly or they're not brave enough. But with this particular event, they seem to, and I don't really get it. And I do want to talk about that a little more in the context of baseball. Right after we do take a quick break. Briefly, I had a short week with Dead Player of the Day. It has just been a very harried time with medical stuff, family stuff, and writing many other things. I only got to 2 players, 14 to go in this series, so we are getting to the end. Those 2 players were the Cubs and Dodgers outfielder Augie Goldman, who I talk about as sort of a early version of Bernie Williams, except with so many more injuries. And I saw somebody write something like this just today. In fact, it was my pal Craig Calcaterra about Mike Trout saying, as great as he was at his peak, if not for all those injuries. And it's kind of like wishing for somebody to be other than they were. We all do that. We've all used that construction at different times. If not for those injuries, he had the ability. Well, I think he didn't, is the answer. I think that's true of anyone you could say that of, because your constitution is part of your athletic skills. Some players who at one point in their career got hurt all the time would get past it. Like Barry Larkin got past it sufficiently, became durable enough that he put together a Hall of Fame career. His teammate, Eric Davis, not so much. So close. Augie Goldman was like that too. I look at his baseball card, I see a Hall of Famer. Almost. But that almost is everything. The second player I wrote about was also an outfielder. His name was Nick Robinson. He was in the Negro American League. He was with the Memphis Red Sox for most of his career, and I'm not sure I totally get him. If you read it, I hope you will register your feelings about him. If you read about him, he was this massive slugger. It's not there in the stats exactly, but again, who knows what the stats really are. And on that note, let us say this old man, he played 8, he played knick-knack on my break, and we do have to go into a quick break. On the other side, we say, move over, Billy Sunday. And I'm pretty sure that Cap Anson said that at one point, and if not him, King Kelly. Let me tell you here at the outset that this section is going to be brief and it's going to be inconclusive because I don't think I could come to a conclusion in 100 episodes, this being one of those issues, and we've already touched on it, that humanity just has a problem solving. Lately, I've been reading this science fiction novel by Elizabeth Bear, and one of the premises of this book, which takes place at some point in the far-flung future, as so many of them do, is that at some point, humanity experiences this deep ecological crisis, and everyone who could, meaning all of the antisocial, selfish, retrograde thinkers, got on their spaceships and said, "You're welcome to the place, it's screwed anyway," and they left. And what the people who were left behind figured out was that without all those antisocial types, they could actually communicate with each other, have productive meetings essentially, and figure out how to solve their problems and create a utopia. And as I talked about in the baseball prospectus piece I referred to earlier, I do think that human tribalism, that there was a good reason for it, going back to the dawn of time when we first dropped from the trees and put on pants, or even before pants, even before kilts. But now it represents a maladaptation that in every group of human beings, there are some that have moved on further from that primitive period than others have. And unfortunately, it expresses itself in every kind of sectarian or racial dispute that we live with to the present day. I was curious how long this particular strain of humanity had expressed itself in baseball. And I thought back to 1925 and the Scopes trial, and I wondered if anyone had, asked Babe Ruth about that. I remember when Herbert Hoover was running for election, I guess in 1928, he asked Babe Ruth to pose with him, or one of his advanced people did. And Babe Ruth said, "Nope, nothing doing on politics. Besides, I'm a Democrat." But I don't know that anyone would have asked him about the teaching of the theory of evolution. But I found myself thinking about this. And when I was a wee lad and the Yankees were busy losing to the Dodgers in the World Series, I remember my father having on, I watched this with him, Pearly, a filmed stage musical. It was on PBS, and it's an adaptation of, you know him better as an actor, Ossie Davis's 1961 play, Pearly Victorious. Pearly, the musical, had originated on Broadway in 1970 and run a very respectable 700 performances or so. The original starred Cleavon Little, best remembered for Blazing Saddles, I imagine. The version I saw starred Robert Guillaume of Soap and Benson and The Lion King fame. The story takes place in the Jim Crow South. The titular character is an itinerant black preacher, but he's also something of a con man and a closet revolutionary, and he plans to liberate some cotton sharecroppers from debt. The non-musical original was revived on Broadway a couple of years ago and was supposedly quite good. There's also a 1963 film of the play with Davis and his wife, Ruby Dee. It's called Gone Are the Days, and you can find it on YouTube, which is good because it doesn't get out much otherwise. I remember very little about that musical, but one line from Pearly's introductory song stuck with me and has for all these years. The song is called Newfangled Preacher Man, and Pearly sings, "Move over, Billy Sunday, move over, Billy Graham, make way for a newfangled preacher man." Now, Billy Graham was around and active, especially given it was the days of Ronald Reagan, so I was aware of who he was. Current events was always a big part of my upbringing, but I didn't know who Billy Sunday was. That didn't resonate. It was only later, when I had baseball books, that I stumbled over him and kept stumbling over him. William Ashley Sunday was a Chicago Cub. They called themselves the White Stockings then, but the team was and is the one we know as the Cubs. He got there in 1883 in the Cap Anson days. Anson discovered Sunday, in fact, in his hometown of Marshalltown, Iowa. He brought him aboard as kind of a fourth, fifth outfielder, and he was part of the pennant-winning 1885 and 1886 teams with Cap and John Clarkson, King Kelly, and the rest of that very scruffy gang. Sunday didn't like that they were scruffy. Many of you already know where this is going, but he kept bugging them to stop drinking. He had reason for that. Now, Pete Crow Armstrong, Billy Sunday was not. As I said, he was more of a fifth outfielder type. He was a poor hitter, an impatient one, something I somehow find symbolic. In 1888, the Cubs sold him to the American Association team we know as the Pirates, and he played regularly. It proved not to be a good idea. Even in the late 1880s, no one needed a regular outfielder hitting .243 with a .292 on base and .297 slugging percentage. Sunday was a poor fit in the clubhouse culture of the time because baseball was, and for years after, decades, was very invested in drinking, and he hated alcohol. He came by it honestly. He had been raised by a drunken stepfather, and that turned Sunday into a temperance man. He would have been that even if he had never had the religious epiphany that hit him in 1886, that he should preach for Jesus. And it took some time, but he dedicated his life to that. And he dedicated it in a way that we would now recognize as evangelical revivalism. I guess that's what you would call it. Today, a lot of it's on television or in these mega churches. But back then, before mass media, you would go from town to town on what they called the Sawdust Trail, set up tents or tabernacles, and preach to whoever would show up. You try to gather a crowd and get donations and make converts, not necessarily in that order. And from then on, Billy Sunday was out there, he said, to fight with the devil. And the devil was, for a long time, mostly booze. Now, let me say in advance, I'm not mocking this. I think his crusade was wrong-headed in certain ways, not necessarily the spiritual part of it, but the prohibition part of it. I'm not mocking how people deliver religion or how they choose to take it. It's not always my medicine. It very rarely is, but it's also none of my business if it's yours. So I don't want anyone to think that I'm being condemnatory. I just want to talk about Billy Sunday. This was from an article about one of his revival meetings in 1913. On a chair behind a pine pulpit, a tall, well-formed man stands coatless and collarless, waving an American flag. Come on, boys! You've got a chance to show your manhood. I want every man of you in the name of your pure mother, in the name of your manhood, in the name of your wife, and the pure, innocent children that climb up on your lap and put their arms around your neck to climb on here on the water wagon with me. I want every man of you to say, God helping me, I'll fight that dirty, stinking, damnable business until it's knocked into hell. How many of you will say that? How many of you will line up with me? Stand up if you will. That's right, stand up, men, stand up. And he began to pray. Lord, I'm nearly dead. Gee, but I'm tired. It's a fine bunch of men, though, isn't it, Lord? A dandy bunch. You know, Lord, we pretty nearly preached our head off this afternoon, but it's worth it, Lord. Look at that crowd, all lined up to fight the saloon. Great, isn't it? And Lord, you know, we've got nothing against the saloon keeper. We'd do anything for him that we could. We'd help him, but not his business, Lord. Lord, you can damn his business just as soon as you want to. And the brewer, Lord, bless the brewer, but don't bless his business. I know you wouldn't, Lord, but I just thought I'd mention it. Lord, anything I can do, any little sacrifice I can make to blot out this curse, this destroyer of the home and the church and of decent business and of boys and girls, you know I'll do it, don't you, Lord? I'm standing here waving the flag, and the blood of my father is running through my veins, and he fought to save the old flag in 61, and my grandfather fought for it way back before that, and I'm fighting its battles too, Lord, for the flag and the home and the boys and the girls of the land. He was telling the truth about his father, who he never knew. His father did die in service during the Civil War. It was disease that got him, but that's just as honorable a way to go, especially in that period when disease was so rampant among soldiers. I think, if I recall correctly, more soldiers died in the Civil War of illness than they did of war wounds. I feel obligated to point out how much of the temperance movement was bundled up with the late 19th century anti-immigration fever. But that's not the main reason why I said his crusade was wrong-headed. The author who transcribed the sermon I quoted, Bruce Barton, wrote that Sunday's idea of God was that he, capital H, he, is working for Billy Sunday just as hard and as long as Billy Sunday works for him. And that strikes me as just a little blasphemous, in large part because it makes God a means to an end. I mean, it also presumes that you can understand the ineffable, which always strikes me as reductive. Sunday's end was temperance, weaning people off of alcohol. And whereas he wasn't wrong about demon rum having a deleterious effect on people and being a drug of abuse, his method, prohibition, turned out to be one of the worst ideas in American history. People wanted it. And as we've seen in the decades since, it's been 100 years since Prohibition came in, over 100 years. It came in 1920 and ended in 1933, that people are persuadable to have less of something that they are made to understand is bad for them. But that doesn't mean that they're willing to have it taken away from them altogether by the government. And what Americans were made to see in that time is that you can defy the law if you disagree with it, that the government is not especially competent at enforcing laws that the vast majority of people disagree with. And oh, by the way, we're going to empower organized crime in a way that it goes from terrorizing neighborhoods to terrorizing at about the same level of income as big business with just as much influence. And in short, the whole movement turned us into a nation of hypocrites. Even having seen that, Sunday was never ready to let it go. Towards the end of his life, he talked about how he was sure it was going to come back, maybe in 10 years or so, and he hoped he would live to see it come back. He died in 1935, and if he had lasted longer, he would have been waiting longer because the country had moved on, and rightly so. He must have been a very dynamic performer, as athletic on the revival stage as he was in the field. Every picture of him, jumping, running, sliding, hands waving in the air, not in baseball uniform, in shirt sleeves. That's the way he preached. He looks like he's dancing, and maybe he was. The New York Times called him the acrobatic dervish of evangelism who danced like a shadow boxer. He poses on one foot like a fastball pitcher winding up. He jumps upon a chair. In the stress of his routine, he may stand with one foot in the chair and another on the lectern. All the while, he is inveighing against the Whiskey Kings, the German warlords, slackers, suffragettes, or the local ministry. Yeah, First World War, he was all for it. Well, he got prohibition, as I said, at least for a while, so he had to turn to new causes. And one was to trash the teaching of the theory of evolution. He called that pure jackass nonsense. While he didn't go to Dayton for the Scopes trial in 1925, William Jennings Bryan had asked him to go. He said no, but he wrote back urging Bryan to kick ass. He did not believe and said explicitly many times that science and religion could not be reconciled. I don't think that's necessarily true. And on the other side of a break, and I don't have far to go with this story, as I said, there's no way to end it. But I do want to continue just a little longer talking about this early example of a conservative religious ball player who was circling the wagons against what he viewed as an irreligious threat, just as the San Francisco Giants, or four of them, did just this last week. Not to mention in an independent league in York, Pennsylvania, they had to forfeit their Pride Night game. We'll talk about that a little bit too. You know, by the way, all the rest of his life, no one ever let Billy Sunday get away from baseball, and they were always asking him to make up his all-star teams and talk about the game, and he would do that from time to time. His wife said, "Oh, you should put yourself on the all-star team." And he said, "No, that wouldn't be right because I wasn't that great. I could run really well, but I wasn't a good hitter. You know, one year I hit 350, but Cap Anson hit 420, so how good was that?" And, you know, that was just a lie. Cap Anson never hit anything like 420 during the time that he and Billy Sunday were together. And Billy Sunday never hit anything like 350. He topped out at 291 in 1887, and that was a fluke. He was a career 248, 300, 317 hitter. And here's another thing that bugs me. As late as the 1930s, he was willing to list Hal Chase as his all-time best first baseman, even knowing what he absolutely must have known about Hal Chase by then. Move over Billy Sunday indeed. Make room for Lou Gehrig, why don't you? How can you trust a man who's trying to sell you on morals when he lists an immoral first baseman? As I said a moment ago, last week the San Francisco Giants had Pride Night, and it was the typical debacle with a subset of players either refusing to wear gear with a rainbow on it or putting a verse from Genesis about the rainbow on their hats, which is a way of saying, the rainbow ain't yours. It's not about inclusivity. It's about God's covenant. That's our department, not yours. This week, an independent team in York, Pennsylvania had to forfeit the game they had scheduled for their little Pride Night because too many players refused to wear rainbow gear. York's owners handled this really well, actually, saying all the right things, and they held Pride Night anyway, just without a baseball game. And I'm not going to recapitulate what I said earlier about why this is for a subset of baseball players an acceptable prejudice, one that they are not afraid to enunciate publicly, and also to ask what kind of religion needs to drive these kinds of wedges between groups of people. It seems axiomatic that for many sects of religion that your salvation equals someone else's condemnation, but I don't think that that has to be the way. And lots of people can find lots of different paths to the same door and let God sort out the rest. For someone who's omnipotent and omniscient and so on, we sure don't feel like relaxing and leaving him anything to do. But back to Billy Sunday. In Boston in 1916, in the midst of indulging in a great deal of subtle anti-Semitism, couched in praising Jesus for being a Jew, he just went on and on about the Jews are great people. They're so good with money. I really appreciate how great they are with money. And there was a lot of laughter there because people understood what he was doing. He said, I don't believe in the bastard theory of evolution that man came from protoplasm by the fortuitous concurrence of atoms. Though, if by evolution you mean advance, I go with you. But if you mean by evolution that I came from a monkey, good night. Evolution does not say that, of course. It says that humans and chimpanzees had a common ancestor at a time so long ago as to be almost incomprehensible. As alcohol consumption was tied up with immigration, the fear of evolution was tied up with conceptions of race. You don't need me to go into all that again now, but if you get prejudice out of the way, evolution isn't irreconcilable with Genesis. Spencer Tracy asks in Inherit the Wind, the film about the Scopes trial, okay, sure, the earth was created in 7 days, but how long is one of God's days? There's a longer discussion to be had, and it's probably not to be had on this particular podcast, but about the insularity of religion and how, as I said earlier, it relates to mankind's most primitive days. Religion comes from back then, too. It's how we explain the world. You who are listening now, again, I want to be careful. I am not saying that your deity of choice is the same as the sky gods and trickster foxes and spiders of old. I'm saying that's what we had, and that's who we benched in favor of the gods that we worship today. And if you believe that once that happened, we got it right and it's right in whatever way, I'm not going to argue with you. That's yours, and I do not believe in getting between you and that belief. It's sort of the point, too. Faith is something you believe in unshakably, and yet faith is always under threat. Logically, it can't be both. If what you believe is the infallible truth, how could it ever fail to succeed in the marketplace of ideas? Why is it your responsibility even to defend truths that are self-evident? Why does getting on a beneficial, benevolent lifeboat require tossing someone else into an angry sea? And for something as transient and ultimately unimportant, really, if we didn't make such a big deal of it, about who they kiss or who they choose to fall in love with, as if that's anybody's business but theirs. And more to the point, why object to something that is simply about saying to those people, there is a greater baseball community. You are part of it. come to the ballpark and we'll celebrate that with you. Doesn't mean we're that invested, but just as if we happen to be in some cheesy restaurant on the night it was your birthday, we'll clap along with the waitstaff as they bring out a pathetic little cupcake with a candle on it. It's a minimal gesture. It doesn't mean we're moving in together, and for all I know, you're kind of a jerk. But it's your birthday, so whatever. No one asked them to say yes as part of wearing this hat. I'm putting aside all my qualms about Scott making out with Brad, and vice versa. All they were being asked to do was to say welcome to the baseball game. The same way they did the Shriners when they bought out the right field section that time. What a small and petty thing it was that they were incapable of doing that and instead had to make the ineffectual, weak gesture that they did. And I think that's what I want to leave you. No, that's not right. I want to leave you with this. I want to leave you with Irma Lee Barton. If the universe is just and justly organized, why did she get caught between two moving buses and smashed to death at 16 on her way back from something as innocent and wholesome as a ball game? How is faith consistent with that? I'll hang up and take my answer off the air. As I've said many times before at the end of the show, we are living in the world that cried wolf. These are the stories of my soul. Should you wish to tell me the stories of your soul, you can follow me on social media at stephengoldman.bsky.social. You can also write us, by which I mean me, at infiniteinning@gmail.com. There remains a Facebook group. I don't have to tell you about how that works. Not after 380 episodes. And if you wish to support the show and communicate with me that way, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/theinfiniteinning, and I really hope you do. Gear of a rudimentary kind available at the-infinite-inning.creator-spring.com. Original soundtrack available gratis at casualobservermusic.bandcamp.com. And as usual, should you find yourself with the proverbial moment to spare, rate, review, and subscribe with the podcatcher of your choice. And if your podcatcher doesn't let you do those things, review and rate some Bible readings. I am not the most spiritual fellow, but I read the Bible all the time. I have been doing so since I was a kid, and I'm never sorry. It's one of my favorite books. Our theme song, which you have been listening to throughout the episode, was a co-composition of myself and Dr. Richard Mooring, who says, "Did you know that Billy Sunday hit 2 of his 12 home runs off of Pretzelsgezin of Prussia?" Yeah, I did. The fact that people like pretzels were here drinking a lot of beer, that's what I mean about temperance being tied up in xenophobia. And if we can all survive xenophobia, then I'll be back next week with more tales from inside the Infinite Inning.